I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here I am, telling a story I never wanted to tell, about a betrayal so deep it's haunted me every day since I found out. It all started a few months ago, during what was supposed to be a heartbreaking but quiet family funeral. My mother had passed unexpectedly, and our whole world turned upside down. We were supposed to come together, grieve, support each other. Instead, I discovered something that shattered the last shred of trust I had left. It began with little things, strange texts on her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, a late-night call that seemed too secretive, hurriedly deleted. But I dismissed them at first, convincing myself it was just grief making her distracted. My wife, Sarah, was supposed to be my partner through all this, my confidant. She'd been acting a little distant lately, but I chalked it up to stress or maybe the grief. People handle loss differently after all. It was the day after the funeral, the house still thick with the scent of lilies and the muted hum of relatives packing up their things. I was sitting in the living room, nursing a burnt-out cup of coffee when I noticed my wife's phone buzzing on the table. She was in the kitchen, fussing over the leftover food, her back turned. I hesitated for a second, then reached out and grabbed her phone. I was about to put it back when something made me stay. The message was from my brother, Mark. It was a joke at first, something about the funeral, a winking emoji. But then I saw the rest. A string of texts that weren't just friendly or joking. They were intimate, flirtatious, full of inside jokes that only they shared. My stomach clenched tight. My hands went cold and sweaty. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I skimmed through more messages, my eyes burning with disbelief. There were photos too, flirty photos, enough to make my skin crawl. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. All this time I thought my brother was just a good guy, someone I trusted. Turns out he'd been sneaking around with my wife behind my back, and it all happened just days before my mother's funeral. I swear, I felt like I was living someone else's nightmare. I closed her phone slowly, my mind racing. I could feel the blood draining from my face, my vision narrowing as anger bubbled up. I knew I had to do something, but I also knew I couldn't confront her there and then. Not without a plan. I needed to think, to process what this meant. But one thing was clear. My world had just flipped upside down, and everything I believed about my family was now a lie. Later that night, I sat alone in the dark, staring at the ceiling. My fists clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. Every breath felt like I was inhaling acid. How could they do this? During my mother's funeral, the one day we were supposed to support each other, they were out there betraying me, betraying everything we stood for. I could feel my jaw tighten beneath my skin, and my brain kept replaying their messages over and over. It was like I'd been hit with a sledgehammer, and I could taste the metallic tang of betrayal. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about revenge, about how to make them feel the hurt I was drowning in. I wasn't the kind of guy to just let this slide. I knew I needed a plan, something precise, something to hit where it would hurt most without crossing into violence. I spent hours mapping it out, feeling the cold sweat on my palms, trying to hold on to my composure. I knew that if I acted out of raw anger, I'd only make things worse. No, I had to be smart. The next morning, as sunlight crept through the curtains, I decided. I'd gather proof, confront them both, and let them see what they'd done to me. They thought they'd gotten away with it, that their little secret was safe. But they were wrong. I was done being a victim. I was going to make them regret ever crossing that line, and I'd do it with a calm, calculated fury that would leave no doubts. I already had a few ideas for how to go about it. I'd leave the evidence right where they couldn't ignore it. Maybe a little gift I'd leave behind to make sure they knew I knew. But I wasn't rushing. I was just setting everything up. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, and I knew this was just the beginning. They thought they'd betrayed me once. But I was about to show them what real betrayal looked like in return. I wondered how they'd react when they realized I knew everything. Would they try to justify themselves? Or would they just pretend it never happened? Either way, I was ready. They'd push me into a corner, and now I was going to fight back. And I'd do it without a single word spoken, just actions. Because sometimes words are too weak for what you want to say. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to the images, The messages, the photos, the secret whispers I'd caught in that brief moment of spying. I had to stay calm, I told myself. If I lost control, I'd blow everything. But deep inside, I knew I couldn't let this slide. Not anymore. Not after everything we'd shared. The betrayal cut so deep I felt like I'd been stabbed in the chest. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I needed evidence, something undeniable that would make it impossible for either of them to deny what they'd done. I didn't want a messy confrontation fueled by raw emotion. I wanted a clean, precise strike. So I started to gather everything I could. I installed a discreet app on her phone, one that would record her calls and messages without her knowing. Yeah, I was going full covert, but I didn't see any other way. I had to be strategic. Over the next few days, I watched her closely. She was tense, avoiding eye contact, and I swear I caught her scratching her phone more often. I kept my cool, pretending nothing was wrong. Meanwhile, I was collecting everything, the evidence of the affair, the hidden conversations. Each text, each photo, felt like a dagger twisting inside me. I felt my fists clench tighter, my jaw grinding so hard I was worried I'd break a tooth. One afternoon, she left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went to the store. I took my chance, snatched it up, and tucked it into my pocket. I knew she'd noticed I was being a little distant, maybe suspicious, but I played it cool. When she got back, I casually handed her her phone, acting like I didn't know a thing. She looked at me with that innocent but guilty expression, but I kept my face unreadable. My mind was already working on how to turn this to my advantage. Later that evening, I sat in the garage with a beer. I spread out all the evidence I'd collected, screenshots, recordings, even the photos she'd sent Mark. It was a sickening haul. I stared at the phone, feeling a mix of disgust and resolve. I knew I had to confront her, but I needed to do it right. I couldn't let her spin a story, couldn't let her deny it if I had it all laid out. When she finally came into the garage, I looked up from the pile of evidence. "We need to talk," I said calmly. She looked nervous, almost panicked. "About what?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I pressed the phone into her hand. "About this, about you and Mark." Her face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. I shook my head slowly. "Don't lie to me, Sarah. I've seen everything." Her eyes darted away, then back. "It was just a mistake," she whispered. "It didn't mean anything." The words felt hollow, like poison. I felt my stomach turn, but I kept my voice steady. "A mistake during my mother's funeral, that's what you call it." I let that hang in the air. "No, I think it's more than that. I think you've been lying for months, hiding this from me." She looked ready to cry, but I didn't care. I was already planning my next move. The betrayal wasn't just about cheating. It was about the fact they'd both lied to my face, pretending everything was fine while they played their sick game behind my back. That realization made my blood boil. I couldn't stand the thought of her justifying it, so I made a decision. I'd give her a taste of her own medicine. That night I stayed up late, working on my plan. I knew I'd confront them both soon, but I wanted to do it on my terms. I wanted them to see I was serious, that I wasn't going to walk away quietly. I would make them regret ever crossing me. I'd make sure they understood that their betrayal had consequences. The quiet rage was building inside me, and I could feel it ready to explode. Tomorrow, I'd set my plan in motion. I knew exactly what I needed to do. It was time they learned how it felt to be betrayed by someone they thought they could manipulate. I was done being the victim. From this point on, I'd be the one calling the shots, and I was going to make damn sure they never underestimated me again. The morning after that confrontation, I woke up feeling a strange mixture of calm and adrenaline. I had everything I needed: proof, a plan, and a mindset sharpened by anger and betrayal. The first thing I did was prepare a small, carefully thought-out gift for Sarah and Mark. Something that would make them realize I knew everything without me having to say a word. I wanted to leave a mark, a reminder that I was not just some naive fool anymore. I went out and bought a cheap but sturdy flash drive. On it, I stored all the evidence: the screenshots, the recordings, the photos. I also added a few personal messages I'd intercepted from her phone, things that made it clear I wasn't just blindly trusting anymore. I wanted to give her and Mark a chance to see everything laid out plainly, with no room for denial. I figured I'd leave it somewhere. They'd find it maybe in her purse or tucked into her coat pocket. Somewhere she'd discover it early enough that it would shake her to her core. I spent the rest of the day setting up my plan. I knew they'd be home in the evening, that's when I'd strike. I stayed in the shadows, watching, waiting. Every sound from the house made my stomach tight. I could feel the familiar rush of anticipation, part fear, part fury. I wasn't sure what I wanted more, to confront them head-on or just to see their reactions when they found out I knew. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I took my position. I slipped the flash drive into her purse, careful not to make a sound. I even left a small note on top. Look inside, everything you need to know. I watched from a distance as she entered the house, her eyes darting around nervously. Mark was already there, acting casual, but I knew better. They both knew I'd found out. They spent the evening in tense silence, and I pretended to be oblivious. I was in the kitchen, pretending to get a snack, but I kept my ears open. Then I saw Sarah pick up her purse and head towards the bedroom. My heart pounded harder. I saw her rummage through it and her hand went straight to the pocket where I'd hidden the flash drive. She hesitated, then slowly pulled it out. Her eyes widened when she saw the note. I saw her mouth open in shock, then she looked at Mark. "What is this?" she whispered. Mark just shrugged, trying to look nonchalant, but I could tell he was rattled. She looked at the note again, then at the flash drive, then she finally plugged it into her laptop. The screen flickered and I watched her face turn pale as the evidence loaded up in front of her. I stayed in the living room pretending to watch TV, but inside I was a mess of nerves and satisfaction. My plan was working. I could hear her voice from the other room, trembling. "Oh my God, I can't believe it." Mark's voice was tense. "Didn't think he'd find out so soon." I didn't need to hear more. I already knew what would happen next. A confrontation, a confession, maybe tears. But I wasn't going to be the one begging for answers. I'd already made my choice. I would give them a chance to come clean, but I'd be ready for whatever they threw at me. Because from this moment on, I was no longer in the dark. I knew the truth, and I was going to make sure they paid. As I watched from the shadows, I felt a strange mixture of relief and rage. The first step was done. The evidence was out there, undeniable. Now I just had to wait for the fallout. I wasn't sure how long I could hold my anger in check, but I knew one thing for sure. Once this all played out, nothing would be the same. They had crossed a line, and I was about to make sure they understood exactly how deep that betrayal ran. Soon, they'd face the consequences, and I'd be the one calling the shots. By the time I woke up the next morning, the house was eerily quiet. I knew Sarah and Mark had spent the night in a restless state, probably trying to process what they'd seen, what they'd been caught doing. I stayed in my room, pretending to be asleep, listening to every movement, every whisper. I could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. They were both walking on eggshells, and I knew I had to be ready for whatever was coming. I didn't want to rush into things, not yet. I'd left the evidence out in the open, but I needed to let it sink in, to let them squirm a little. I had to see how they'd react when they realized I wasn't going to forgive or forget so easily. I was angry, but I kept my expression neutral. It was important to stay calm, to keep control of the situation. I knew if I showed my hand too soon, they'd spin some sob story or deny everything. I wanted to corner them, not give them a chance to run. Around mid-morning, Sarah finally came into the living room, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. Her face was pale, eyes red, yet she was trying to act composed. She looked at me, then at the empty space where I'd been lying earlier. "Can we talk?" she finally asked, her voice shaky. I sat up slowly, stretching, trying to appear indifferent. "Sure," I said, "but I already know what's going on. The evidence is pretty clear." I let that hang between us. Her hands trembled as she sat down across from me. Mark peeked his head in the doorway, hesitant, unsure if he should step closer or stay back. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she blurted out, voice cracking. "It was a mistake, just a moment of weakness." She looked desperate, like she was pleading for mercy, but I wasn't buying it. I'd heard enough. "Stake during my mother's funeral," I said coldly. "Really, that makes it okay." She looked away, tears welling up. "I swear I didn't plan it. I never wanted to hurt you like this." She was trying to justify herself, but I felt an icy calm settling over me. I had already seen all I needed. Her words, her tears, they didn't change what she'd done. My stomach twisted, but I kept my voice steady. You betrayed me, Sarah. You and Mark, you both lied to my face. I trusted you. I loved you, and you threw that all away for what? A few secret messages. I took a deep breath, my fists clenched in my lap. You think I'm just going to forgive you, that I'll forget? She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. Please don't do this. I was weak. I messed up. I was hurting, and I thought I could get away with it. I didn't mean for it to ruin everything. Mark finally stepped into the room, rubbing his hands nervously. Look, man, I didn't want this to happen either. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry, really. His voice was trembling, and I could see the guilt etched all over his face. Good. If they thought they could just apologize and everything would go back to normal, they had another thing coming. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the betrayal crush my chest. Sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't erase years of trust gone in a heartbeat. I want you both to understand you've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed, and I want you to leave tonight. Their faces went blank, stunned into silence. Sarah looked like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Mark looked like he was ready to argue, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned, grabbing my keys from the hook on the wall. Pack your things, I want you gone now. They didn't argue, they knew better than to argue. I could see the shock, the shame, and maybe even a hint of regret flickering in their eyes, but I didn't care. They had made their choice, and I was done playing the victim. I was taking back my life piece by piece. As they packed, I sat in the living room, feeling a strange sense of cold clarity. This was the end of our chapter, at least the end of what we'd had. I didn't want to hear their excuses, their pleas, or their apologies. I just wanted to close this door and start rebuilding from the ashes. When they finally left, I stood at the door and watched them get in the car. No tears, no shouting, just silence. I closed the door behind them and finally let out a long breath. It was done. They were gone, and I was free from their lies. But inside, a part of me still felt hollow, like I'd lost something I could never get back. I looked around the empty house, the quiet now almost deafening. I knew I had to move on to find my footing again. But one thing was certain. I'd never forget the sting of betrayal, and I'd never let anyone do that to me again. Trust was sacred, and I wasn't going to give it away so easily anymore. Next, I planned to set my revenge in motion, something that would hit them where it hurt most without crossing the line. I needed them to understand exactly what they'd lost, and I was determined they'd never forget it. The house was silent now, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of traffic outside. I sat on the couch, staring at the empty doorway where they'd just left. My hands still felt slightly numb, like I'd lost feeling in them after all the adrenaline. For the first time in days, I finally had space to breathe, but it wasn't relief. I felt a bitter kind of satisfaction mixed with annoying emptiness. That's when I started planning the next move. I knew I couldn't just go on with my life pretending nothing had happened. That betrayal had cut too deep. I had to make them see the consequences, make them regret betraying me in a way that hit just as hard as they hit me. I'd already gathered evidence of everything, enough to completely destroy their false sense of security. But what I really wanted was to make them feel the pain of betrayal in a way they'd never forget. I sat there, thinking it through. My mind kept circling around one idea. I wanted to confront them with something unexpected, something that would shake their world even more. I had to be clever, subtle, but effective. So I decided to turn the tables in the most calculated way possible. I drove to a local store and bought a small, inexpensive but discreet gift card, one that I could leave somewhere they'd find it naturally. I also prepared a short, handwritten note. Nothing too obvious, just enough to make them curious. The note read, "For the one who betrayed everything, your secret's safe with me for now. But beware, revenge is a dish best served cold." I didn't want them to know I was behind it at first. I wanted to see how long it would take for their paranoia to set in. I tucked the card and note into a small envelope, sealed it, and planned to leave it in their mailbox when they weren't looking. I knew I'd have to wait a little, but that didn't bother me. I was patient. I'd waited long enough. Later that evening, I slipped out quietly. The street was dark, the air crisp, and the only sound was the rustling of leaves. I approached their mailbox, my heart pounding slightly. I slipped the envelope inside, then stepped back into the shadows. I watched from the corner as they both came out to check the mailbox, their faces puzzled. Sarah opened it, saw the envelope, and her eyes widened. Mark looked over her shoulder, reading the note silently. They exchanged a glance, and I could see the wheels turning in their heads. It was working. From that moment, things got tense. They started acting paranoid, checking their mail multiple times a day, whispering behind closed doors. I could tell they were trying to piece everything together, trying to figure out who was behind it. I had succeeded in planting that seed of doubt, and I knew I'd keep pushing until they cracked. I kept my distance, watching their reactions, knowing I'd have to step it up soon, but I was careful. I wanted them to feel watched, to know that I was still in control. Every glance, every whisper was a reminder that I hadn't forgotten and wouldn't forgive. The betrayal had shattered my trust, and now I was making sure they felt the cold weight of the consequences. The more they fretted, the more I felt my rage simmer. I didn't need to do anything drastic yet. I just had to keep them on edge, keep them feeling vulnerable. My goal was simple: make them realize that their actions had consequences they couldn't run from. They had betrayed the very core of my life, and now they were paying the price. One night I left a little more evidence in their driveway, an anonymous note, just a simple message. You can run, but you can't hide from what you did. I watched from the shadows again as Mark found it, his face twisting with anger and confusion. Sarah looked like she was about to cry, clutching her stomach as if the pain was physical. I knew I'd pushed them far enough. Soon, I'd make my final move. I'd give them one last wake-up call, something that would make them realize the gravity of what they'd lost, that their betrayal had consequences beyond what they could imagine. I had to make them understand that I was no longer the victim. I was the one in control now, and they'd regret ever crossing that line. Next, I planned to confront them face to face, directly laying everything out, so they'd never forget the look on their faces when they realized I was finished playing nice. Tonight was the night I'd been waiting for. All my careful planning, all the subtle moves. I was finally going to close this chapter with a definitive act. I had everything in place. The house was dark, quiet, just the way I wanted it. I knew they'd be home, probably feeling paranoid, anxious, maybe even a little scared. I didn't care. This was about making them see the damage they'd done and making sure they understood that betrayal has a price. I slipped into the house quietly, my heart pounding, palms slick with sweat. I knew exactly where they would be, probably in the living room, trying to come up with explanations or maybe praying I'd just disappear. Not tonight. Tonight I was going to make sure they'd never forget what they'd done. I grabbed the keys I'd hidden earlier, the ones I'd prepared. I knew they kept a set in the drawer by the door. I opened the drawer, took out the keys, and then, with deliberate calm, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small stack of papers. Divorce papers. I'd already filled them out, just waiting for this moment. I placed the papers on the coffee table, right in front of them, then switched on the recording app I'd set up earlier. It was time to say what I needed to say. I turned to face them as they entered, eyes darting around nervously. Sarah looked like she was about to cry, and Mark looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I took a deep breath and started speaking softly but firmly. You both thought you could get away with this, that I wouldn't find out, that I'd never know the truth. Well, I know everything now. All those messages, all those lies, you thought I was blind, but I see everything clearly. And I want you both to know you've broken something that can never be fixed. I paused just long enough for the weight of my words to settle, then I continued. This, I gestured at the divorce papers, is the only way I know to reclaim what's left of my dignity. You betrayed your vows, your family, everything we built together. I won't be a part of this anymore. Sarah's eyes widened, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mark looked defeated, silent. I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. I waited, letting the silence do the work. I could see her trembling, her lips trembling with the effort to speak. But I didn't need her words. I had already made up my mind. Take this as the last act of my kindness, I said quietly. Sign the papers. Leave tonight, don't come back, and don't expect to fool me again. I'll move on, but I'll never forget what you did, and I'll make damn sure you pay for it. They looked at each other, the weight of what I just said sinking in. Without a word, Sarah reached out and grabbed the pen I'd left next to the papers. Her hands trembled as she started to sign. Mark hesitated for a moment, then followed. The quiet sound of pen on paper was almost deafening in the room. When it was done, I looked at both of them with cold eyes. I want you gone by morning. Don't bother trying to contact me or come back. This is your final warning. If I see you near my house again, I won't be so kind. They gathered their things in silence, nothing left to say. I could see the regret, the shame. They'd lost everything and they knew it. I felt a strange, bitter sense of closure. For once I was in control. I handed them the keys, one last gesture of finality. Goodbye, I said simply. They left without a word, walking out into the night, leaving behind the house that was once filled with love and trust. I watched them go, feeling a strange sense of relief mixed with the ache of finality. As I closed the door behind them, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled me. I'd taken back my life piece by piece, and I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I'd survive. I always would. The lesson I learned. Betrayal cuts deep, but revenge, done right, is a powerful way to reclaim your dignity. Trust is fragile, and once broken, it's almost impossible to fix. Never let anyone make you feel like you're nothing. Because at the end of the day, the only person who truly controls your worth is you.